The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday, February 8th. I hope everybody's having a fantastic weekend. Can somebody in the chat let me know if you're hearing the music okay, or if the music's coming out distorted, or if there are any issues, put it that way, with the music as you hear it. So I know there's a bunch of you in the chat. Just let me know. Sound is good. Always says sounds okay. Okay, so it's somehow distorting on my end. I'll figure that out. No problem. All right. Today we're gonna dedicate Saturdays to deeper dives into issues. Most of them are going to be more philosophical. You could call them positive, but really they're going to be more philosophical. They're going to be focused on philosophical questions. Maybe once in a while we'll cover a Rand essay. I'm not committing to do it a show every Saturday, but generally Saturdays will be that. I'll also add one of the shows during the week will also be, I think, slightly more in depth. There's just a lot of kind of in-depth topics that we need to cover, and the news just takes over, and we land up talking exclusively about the news. So we'll see how it all works out. But I want to bring in more in-depth coverage, partially in-depth coverage about things that are in the news, things that are relevant to the Indian news, and so on. All right. Today we're going to talk about a Catholic thing, a Catholic thing. Ordo Amoris. The order of love. We'll talk about order of love, or rightly ordered love, who one should love first and who one should love last. So we'll talk about that in the context of a comment J.D. Vance made, and in the response that other Christians have made to his comment. And then, well, how would an egoist approach this whole issue? So the focus will be on the positive in terms of what one should do as an egoist. But to set that up, we are going to talk about how the Catholics or the Christians view this. All right. Let's see. So that's going to be the topic for today. I want to remind you that tomorrow we're going to, I guess Alejandro is saying Michael Knowles gave a talk last night on this topic, on Ordo Amoris. The theologian Michael Knowles, I'm sure, gave the definitive statement on this issue. So anyway, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk again about how J.D. Vance used it, and then the backlash he received from a lot of Christians, particularly Catholics, and the fact that they connected that, or the reference was to Saint Augustine of Hippo. I want to remind you, yes, that's what I was doing. I want to remind you that we have two shows tomorrow. Those of you who speak Hebrew, we have a show in Hebrew tomorrow. And it will the show tomorrow will be dedicated to the publication of OPAR, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, right there behind me, on the bookshelf. And it's dedicated to the publication of that book in Hebrew. It's been translated and published in Hebrew in Israel. So I'll be talking to Boaz and to the rest of the guys who are on the show about the value of OPAR and its significance and why it's such an important event, I think, in Israel to have it in Hebrew. And then that's from 11 to 12:30 East Coast time, and then from 1 to 2:30 East Coast time, I'm going to be talking to John Barban about health 3.0, healthcare 3.0. We'll talk about diet and exercise and stuff like that, and his journey, his experience discovering he had cancer, and how he discovered that and what happened as a consequence. We'll talk about that, but really it's mostly about health, so it'll be a positive show. Now, that show is for members only. Now, you can still become a member up until like a second before the show. All you have to do is sign up to be a member. It costs a little bit of money. I think you can get a membership for like $5 a month. But please do so. You get access to all the member shows that I've done. A lot of them on arts, a lot of them the positive kind shows. So you can have access to all of those, and I think you will enjoy them. And finally, let me just remind you before we get to the topic that you guys get to set the rest of the topics for the show by asking questions. Michael has already got us going with a couple of questions, but feel free to jump in with questions. Questions can be related to the topic, or they can be on anything in the world. I'm not sure I can answer anything in the world, but you can ask anything you want. Just put a dollar amount next to the question. All right, so let's jump in. In a Fox News interview, I guess last week or this week, earlier this week, J.D. Vance, the vice president, and who is a relatively recently converted Catholic, and a avowed Christian nationalist, basically said what he laid out what he called, when we talk about immigration, and he laid out what he called a very Christian concept. And this is the concept. Quote, this is quoting J.D. Vance. You love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus on and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that, unquote. Now, this did not go over well with a lot of people who consider themselves Christian. A British politician by the name of Rory Stewart challenged Vance on X, where all important discussions of the day happen. And he said that calling J.D. Vance's take on Christianity bizarre. And he argued that, the New Testament and all of that doesn't actually tell you in which order to love. It just says love, right? So there is this. So now there is this debate among Christians on which order to love. Now, note, importantly, that there's no discussion about why you should love, by what criteria you should love. No, love is a given. It's just a question of who do you love more, and really that boils down to who do you help first. Love is taken for granted. There's no question of why and for what purpose and for whom one should love. So in response, J.D. Vance replied, quote, just Google Ordo Amoris. Now, Ordo Amoris it comes from Latin, and it means order of love, or rightly ordered love. And it's a concept found in the writings of Augustine, Saint Augustine, obviously. Potentially the most important thinker in Christianity, certainly maybe number two after Aquinas, but Aquinas and Augustine, certainly incredibly influential. Augustine influential not only because he influenced much Catholicism, but really, and certainly the early church and all the way up to Aquinas. But Augustine also because he was a huge influence on the Reformation, on Calvin and, I was going to say Calvin and Hobbes, but Calvin and that other Protestant, the guy who started it all. So Augustine, a hugely influential person within. So this kind of back and forth, Google Ordo Amoris, has resulted in a lot of people, tweeting tweeting all kinds of responses about love, what it means, the order of love, and all of that. So I thought what we'll do today is we'll go over kind of their interpretation, the Christian interpretation of what this all means. And then we'll take a step back and say, what the F are they talking about? How did they get to love? Love by what standard? Why am I loving my neighbor, my community, my whatever? J.D. Vance responding to Rory said, just Google Ordo Amoris, and he said, aside from that, the idea that there isn't a hierarchy of obligations. Obligations. Where do they come from? Obligations to whom? Why? Why do you have obligation? A hierarchy of obligations violates basic common sense. Does Rory really think his moral duties, moral duties, where do they come from? Why do you have moral duties? Who dictated the duties? Does Rory really think his moral duties to his own children are the same as his duties to a stranger who lives thousands of miles away? Does anyone? Well, good questions. Not the fundamental questions, not the real questions, but I mean, this is kind of disagreement that exists out there in both the religious and the secular world. Should charity start at home? Do we have obligations to people who live far away? What are those obligations? Are they as big as the obligations we have to the homeless people sleeping under the bridge? But notice, and I'll keep referring to this, but notice that nobody asks, why do we have obligations to anybody? And do we indeed have any obligations? Altruism, the idea that you have obligations to strangers. The idea is that you have obligations to anybody. The idea is that you have unchosen obligations. Note, these are all unchosen. These are duties, i.e. unchosen. The idea that you have duties and obligations that are unchosen is taken for granted. It is the fundamental basis. It is the basis of altruism. It's not even questioned. The whole debate goes by. By the way, I'm taking a lot of this from a Vox article called "Is J.D. Vance Right About Christianity?" And well, that's not exactly the title. What's the title? Is J.D. Vance accidentally directed us to a critical moral question? Just ignore the god-awful reading of Christianity he used to get there. So anyway, this is this particular writer's take on Christianity, but it is, I think, super interesting and brings up a lot of interesting questions. And it shows you, I think, more than anything, how deep, prevalent, unquestioned, really unquestioned, altruism, Christian altruism goes. It's just a question of who do you sacrifice to? Who do you sacrifice to? Now, all of this, by the way, is in the context of two things. One, immigration. That is, what are obligations to people who are suffering and crossing the border and want a safe haven or want economic success here in the United States? Isn't the Christian obligation to take them in? Isn't the Christian obligation to sacrifice for them? And J.D. Vance says, no, our Christian obligation is primarily to the people close by to us. And therefore, if they are preventing us from fulfilling obligation to the people close by, then, we must kick them out and send them home. And the second part of this is in the context of the shutting down of USAID. USAID is U.S. aid, $60 billion of aid, your money, your tax money, or your kids' and grandkids' tax money, going to fund charity all over the world, all over the world. And wait a minute, there are poor people in America. What about poor people in America? Shouldn't my tax money be going to feed them? Nobody, of course, asks, should our tax money be going to help anybody? Help anybody. So that's the context. That's the context. So here's the question, as the framer of this article writes: is it right to put your local community first? Or do you owe more than you might think to total strangers living halfway around the world? Now, of course, the Bible has whatever you want in it, But really, the New Testament is pretty clear about its commitment to altruism, its commitment to sacrifice, its commitment to, helping others no matter whom they are. For example, when Jesus is told that his mother and brothers are waiting for him outside, he says, "Oh, let them in, please." No, he says, "Who is my mother? And who are my brothers? Whoever does the will of my Father," i.e. God, "in heaven, is my brother and sister and mother." In other words, Jesus views Christianity as a universal religion. Everybody's brother and sister. Anybody who does God's work, anybody who's a Christian, is therefore equal. I don't give preference to my family. I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan is another example. The Jew is being beaten up. His stuff is being stolen. He's on the side of the road. Somebody has to help him out. And the people who help him out, the person who helps him out is a Samaritan, whom at the time, Samaritans, were enemies of the Jews. And the Samaritan helps out the Jew and thus is a moral hero for doing so. I mean, love thy neighbor like yourself, which means like yourself. You're supposed to love your neighbor like yourself and your family. And, you're supposed to love everybody, it seems, equally, or even worse, love thy enemy, to, turn the other cheek to the enemy. So the Bible, at least Christianity, seems to be fairly clear that you should really love anybody, love your enemies. You're supposed to love everybody. Now, I get it. It doesn't make sense to love everybody equally. So Augustine kind of comes around and wants to clarify this, right? He wants to clarify this. So this is the quote from Augustine on Ordo Amoris. So bear with me as we go through this deep dive into Christian theology. The stuff you get on the Yaron Brook Show. Pretty amazing. Further, all men are to be loved equally. This is Augustine. But since you cannot do good to all, you ought to pay special regard to those who, by the accidents of time or place or circumstance, are brought into closer connection with you. For suppose that you had a great deal of some commodity and felt bound to give it away to somebody who had none, and that it could not be given to more than one person. If two persons presented themselves, neither of whom had either from need or relationship a greater claim upon you than the other, notice how need is a claim, you could do nothing fairer than choose by lot, flip a coin, to which you would give what could be given to both. Just so among men, since you cannot consult for good of them all, you must take the matter as decided for you by a sort of lot, a sort of flipping the coin. According to each man happens for the time being to be more closely connected with you. So Augustine says, look, ideally, you would help everybody, and you would treat them all equally, close to you or far from you. But you can't. Realistically, you can't. You have limited resources, so you have to choose. How do you choose between the people? Well, you have to flip a coin, because no one person has a greater claim on you, assuming they both have the same need. Need is the standard. Note that if they don't have the same need, if someone is more needy, then he gets it. And he says, look, the fact that some people are your relatives, the fact that some people are your family, the fact that some people live in your community or in your country is just a form of flipping a coin. It's just a form of luck. And given that it's that, then yeah, it makes sense. Help your family first and your community first, and only then strangers. But not because that's what morality requires. It doesn't, but because you only have so much time and so many resources, and you have to pick and choose, and this is as good as flipping a coin. You can't do good to all. So that's a practical consideration. He's a bit of a pragmatist here, right? So, for example, if you're sailing on a stormy sea, this is an example in the article, and you see two people drowning, there's only time for you to save one, then, both are equal need, both are strangers to you. Augustine says, flip a coin. Certainly, as the author of this article tells you, do not pick the guy who promises to reward you more. No. Shame on you. That would be self-interested. So he says, in life, when we face the pragmatic limitation of you cannot do good for all, Augustine says that you can treat the accident of birth as the coin toss. I can save my own relative, not because they're intrinsically more deserving, but because fate happened to make them my relative. I mean, this is beautiful. This is a hierarchy of altruism driven by fate, not, remember this, not ever by your values. It's luck that they happen to be your relatives. So say, help them first. Now, many Christians are going to say, well, okay, so J.D. Vance, it sounds like J.D. Vance is kind of right, even though he doesn't quite interpret it right, kind of right. But here's the problem, as other Christians will point out. America today is super wealthy. It has a lot of stuff. It can help a lot of people. It can help the people close, and it can help the people far. It's the richest country in the world. Most of us are in the global 1%. And money can be divvied up. We can give a little bit to everybody. We're spending very little on foreign aid. And now you want to cut that foreign aid in the name of, in the name of the people close? In the name of Ordo Amoris? That doesn't make any sense. You can help all the people within and a lot of people without, and you can spend a lot more than 1% on that. And look, it's true. And this is just the national budget, but we can spend more than the national budget. And it's more than that. If you're a real Christian, if you take this properly as a Christian. Wait a minute. There is greater need in places like Africa. Greater need among the poor of the world. I mean, America's poor are rich beyond imagination than the poor of the world out there. So need is not equal. An idea that we can't spend more than 1% of our budget on the people who really need it is crazy. Now that, of course, is kind of a Christian interpretation, and they're going to go back and forth, and the J.D. Vances of the world will have their interpretation, and these guys will have their interpretation. But then step in the secular philosophers and say, no, this is a good discussion, they will say. They won't ask, where does this obligation come from? They won't challenge the duty premise that this whole obligation is based on, because it's based and it comes from God. It's a duty and it's an obligation imposed on us by God, by a religion. These are secular philosophers, but they don't start there. They start with, well, of course we have an obligation and a duty. Of course that's the case. But they want to divvy it up based on secular means. Now you take philosopher Peter Singer. who has this famous thought experiment, which we've talked about before on the Yaron Brook show. We've talked about this. Here's the thought experiment, right? I mean, put yourself, I want to hear your answers to this in the chat. You tell me what the answer to is in the chat. Imagine a child is drowning in front of you. You're like on your way to work, and there's a child drowning in a pond next to you. It's in a pretty shallow pond, so you don't have to risk your life to go and save the child. Your clothes are going to get muddy, they're going to get dirty, so you'll have a dry cleaning bill. But other than that, your life is not going to be in danger. Should you rescue the child? Well, almost everybody says, and my guess is, even the people here, people in the chat are going to say, well, yeah, I rescue the child. I mean, but then Singer says, but wait a minute. You're basically walking past that child every day. Every day. Every single day. On your way to work. There is a child dying of starvation in Africa. With a cost of less than the dry cleaning, you could save that child. And you could do that every day. Every day you could pay for the dry cleaning by sending the money to Africa and saving a child. Why aren't we doing that? If literally you would save the child drowning in front of you, and why aren't you saving all the children in Africa? And of course, again, once you've accepted altruism as your standard, the answer is, because I'm being bad, I'm being selfish. Why is the fact that the child in the pond is a stranger, the fact the child in Africa is a stranger, why are you treating them differently? I mean, the answer to that riddle, if you will, is, yeah, I'd save the child in the pond as an emergency, if it happened crazy, but that's not life. If I lived in a place in which a child was drowning in the pond every single day, I'd stop saving them. I can't spend my life saving kids in the pond. That's not what my life's about. As an emergency, as a freak, and I would really question, why is there a child drowning in the pond every day? As I think we should question, why is a child dying of starvation every day in Africa? What is causing that? So, so basically, Peter Singer comes down on the idea that distance doesn't matter. You should save the kid in the pond in front of you, and you should save the child in Africa as well. Right? And then you've got, that's kind of a utilitarian argument. They're all equal. All life is equal. To whom? And for what? That never enters the ballpark because values never enter the ballpark. And then you've got a philosopher, I've never heard of this guy, Bernard Williams, who's a critic of utilitarianism. And he says, people are right to be squirmish about ignoring those who are near and dear. You can't ignore the people who are close to you. He says if you see two people drowning and one is your wife and the other is a stranger, and he says, of course, if you actually pause to consider who you should save, who will maximize the utility for society, then that is awful. Of course you save your wife. And in this sense, he says, we have a hierarchy of commitments. We made a commitment to our wife and children and our family member. So it's through commitments that we make these kind of decisions. Right? Now, notice what is missing from all of these debates, from all of these discussions. What's missing is the self. What's missing is you. What's missing is a rational explanation for why you're doing what you're doing and for what purpose. What is missing are values, your values, an individual's values. And what is imposed on the individual, what is imposed on the individual by pretty much every philosophy out there, secular and religious, is a whole string of obligations and duties to help, to sacrifice for the other. And maybe J.D. Vance and some of these other Christians disagree on which other and in what order you should sacrifice, who you should sacrifice first. 2, they all agree on the fundamental that sacrifice is required, that morality demands that you take care of those in need. They all agree that need is a claim against you. Why? Because God demands so, or because, I don't know how the atheists define this obligation, but because that is the meaning of morality, I guess. It's to sacrifice for others. And in this sense, Rand is the first philosopher, really, to put a stop to this. To say, wait a minute. What is the purpose of this morality? Why do we have morality? Where does morality come from? What is the use of this concept of morality? Morality is a guide to action. It's a guide to values, to differentiating what is good and what is bad, what values you should pursue and what you should avoid. But what are values? She asks. Well, the things that you act to gain or keep. Things that are valuable to you, things that you want. But why should anything be a value to me? What is the purpose ultimately of value? And what's really the precondition of value? What makes something a good value or bad value? What is the standard? And she, without doing the whole meta-ethics, which you can read in the Objectivist ethics, she concludes that life is the standard. And morality is there to teach you what values and virtues are necessary for achieving life, for achieving survival, for achieving flourishing, for achieving, ultimately, happiness. And therefore, everything is oriented towards values that are oriented towards life, rationally, can be understood as pro-life. So Rand is rejecting the idea that somehow we are born with an obligation to help anybody. We are born with no such obligation. Once we choose life, then we now have a set of values that we must pursue. And those values don't create unchosen obligations. Now, so once we choose life, it's now a question of which values are going to promote my life. I don't have an obligation to my neighbor. No, we'll talk about family in a minute. I don't have an obligation to my neighbor. I don't have an obligation to my community. I don't have an obligation to my country. And I certainly don't have an obligation to strangers. Now, some people in my community are real value to me. They're really good people. They add to my life. Them I'm willing to help. I value them more than the others. Not all men are equal. This is Rand's concept of justice. Men are not equal. They're equal in their political rights, but they're not equal in terms of my values, they're not equal in terms of my willingness to interact with them, my willingness to help them, my willingness to do anything with them. That is certainly true within my community. That is true within my nation. That is true globally. The question to be asked by an egoist, i.e., a person who values their own life and who establishes his values and his value hierarchy based on their contribution to his own life. The question he was asked is, who is more valuable to me? Who has earned, deserves my help? Who does not? Who is good, who is bad? By what standard? By the standard of how much they contribute to my life, directly or indirectly. So Rand, in a sense, she's creating a order of love. Ordo Amoris. But her order of love does not start with the idea of one should love thy enemy or thy neighbor or anybody. It starts with, in a kind of gross way, what's in it for me? But yeah, what's in it for me in a rational, fully integrated sense? What value does this person, what value is my action for me? There's no automatic love. There's no duty to love. There's no obligation to love. You love what is of value. You love what contributes to your life. Love is selfish. Because love is about your own values. So let's kind of break this down in terms of the kind of hierarchy that they've created here. They start, of course, J.D. Vance at least starts with family. You have to help your family first. And what does that mean? Now, even with family, I would break it up between a relationship with a spouse and a relationship with your children and a relationship with your parents. All could be counted, not to mention second cousins. What value are they to you? That is the standard. Now, with children, at least up until the age of 18 or up until they leave home, hopefully 18, the question, you have taken on an obligation. You have taken on a commitment. You have taken on a responsibility. And therefore, to your children, you do have an obligation. You actually have chosen an obligation. One of the reasons, and I say this often, one of the reasons I am so pro-abortion, and I know almost nobody says they're pro-abortion. Everybody says, no, I'm pro-choice. I hate abortion, but I'm pro-choice. Women should have a right to decide about this horrible procedure. No, I'm pro-abortion because I want to give parents every opportunity possible to change their minds about having a kid, because a kid is an 18-year obligation they can't walk away from. And that's big. That's a lot. If you have kids, you know. But it is an obligation, whether you love your kid or not, whether when they're 2 or 5 or 7, you decide, I don't like this kid. You still have an obligation. You signed a contract. Sometimes in the middle of a contract, you regret signing it. And yet you have to fulfill it. It's your moral obligation to fulfill the contract. So with a child, it's not a matter of, are they of value to me today? Are they of value to me in general? it could be that at some point you decide they're not of value to you at all. You still are obligated. So in that sense, yeah, that is an obligation. But it's an obligation you chose. Particularly given birth control, particularly given abortion, you have a choice. You can get out of it. And then you have certain obligations to your spouse that are based on agreements between you that you have made. Agreements about, I don't know, anywhere from who takes up the garbage to, sexual exclusivity to, who earns the money and how you divvy it up. Unlike with children, those obligations can be ended. It's called divorce. But beyond that, do you have obligations to your parents? Only to the extent that they represent a value to you. And right? And then you're pursuing it, your relationship with them, you're helping them because they are value to you. They might be a value to you because they raised you pretty well. They might be a value to you because they're really good people and you really enjoy being with them. They might be a value to you because of both. But some parents are not a value to their children. And you have no obligation. So family is not something that is necessarily at the top of the rightly ordered love. It's chosen. Hopefully that's the case with your spouse. They're at the top. And your children. But beyond that, it might not be. And what about your second cousins? Blood is thicker than water or something like that. Blood, it's all about blood. You have no obligation to anybody who happens to have the similar genetic makeup to you. There's nothing in family that contributes to yourself unless they contribute to you, and then justice demands that you treat them accordingly. The only one where there's some sense is parents, because they raised you, and you might feel some wanting to pay them back for the fact that they raised you well. Notice that in all this entire article in Vox, this entire article about this, and in all the discussions on in X back and forth with the Christians and the Catholics and all of this, nobody mentions friends. Friends are people you choose to make close to you. They might not even be in your community. Your friends might be far away. They might be in a different country. They might not even be in the same country as you. And yet, friends are never listed. And why are friends not listed? Because they're chosen. Because friendship is so obviously self-interested. Because friends should not get any special treatment. They should just be put in the same category of all these other groups. Love them all. And yet after family, particularly that family that you chose, your wife, your spouse, your children, friends should be next. These are people you have chosen. And friends are more important than that part of the family you have not chosen. Siblings, cousins, parents even. Friends are crucial. So in the hierarchy of love, and in the hierarchy of care, and in the hierarchy of help, you would think, based again on your values, that it starts with children, which you have an obligation to until the age of 18, and afterwards, hopefully you choose spouse, and then friends. Because you chose them, because they're of value to you, because of what friendship means to you, because the extent to which they contribute to your life. But notice, all of that is about you. It's exactly the person all these people talking about love exclude. You don't matter. You must love out of duty. You must love out of obligation. You must love out of commitment, not out of choice. And therefore, your hierarchy of loves can include those who you choose. What about your neighbors? Well, again, neighbors, it depends. The ones that I'm friendly with, yeah, I'm friendly with them. They may be included in the category of friends. The ones I'm not, and the ones who are obnoxious jerks, they're not in the same category. There is no such thing as neighbors. Vance says you love your family, then you love your neighbor, then you love your community. No. I love some of my family. I love, can't even say I love. I like some of my neighbors. I deeply dislike some of them. I love, and then he says, and then you love your community? I can't say I love my community. Have you ever loved the community? Do you know what that even means? You value your community? I mean, if you live in a really special place and there's a lot going on, there's a lot happening, you could say, yeah, kind of as a generality. But love is something associated with individuals. Associated with individuals that produce value for you. And here I mean produce not just in terms of production, but in terms of they are value to you. They do things that are values to you. So yes, I can imagine that in a community where they are putting on plays and music festivals and, oh, this is great. I love these people in the sense that they're producing values that I'm benefiting from. But it's the values that lead to the love, not the love as the starting point, which isn't love, it's just an excuse to sacrifice. Right? What does it mean to love your community? It means you should be willing to sacrifice for your community. What does it mean, as he goes on, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country? What does it mean to love your fellow citizens in your own country? What does that actually mean? It means to Vance and to all the Christians who are debating him, what that means is I'm willing to sacrifice for them. I'm more interested in sacrificing for them than I'm interested in sacrificing for people in Africa. And I think an egoistic perspective is I'm not willing to sacrifice for anybody. And, I'm willing to help my friends. I'm even willing to help certain strangers if there's some indication that they're not bad people and they might be good people. And yeah, to the extent that it affects me and my life more, I'm probably willing to help strangers who are close by more than strangers who are far away. But the standard is me, my life, my values. And by the way, a friend I'm willing to help even if they're very far away, not citizens, not in the country, somewhere in the other part of the world. I guess that makes me a globalist. That I even have friends in other parts of the world makes me, I guess, a globalist. And do you love your fellow citizens in your own country, no matter what your country is? No matter what kind of a country it is? Do you love your fellow Germans in the midst of their, adoration of Hitler? Right? So, what does it mean? It means, again, I'm emphasizing, when Christians talk about love, what they really talk about is your duty to sacrifice. Love thy neighbor like thyself means be willing to sacrifice for your neighbor. Love thy enemy means be willing to sacrifice for your enemy. Love your community, be willing to sacrifice for your community. And you should be willing to sacrifice your community, Vance tells us, more than you should be willing to sacrifice for the rest of the world. And other Christians say, no, you should be willing to sacrifice to all people equally. And Objectivism says, don't sacrifice. Create a hierarchy of values, even among people. People, You should not view other people from an egalitarian perspective. You should view other people from the perspective of the value they represent for you. And you will love them based on how much value they represent to you. And you will help them based on how much value they represent to you. Akira Felix says, according to Jordan Peterson, if you were in Germany in 1930s, you would absolutely cheer for Hitler, which is completely nonsense, bizarre, untrue. It's still true that a minority of Germans were Nazis. Maybe way too many of them just went along. But the idea that everybody in Germany cheered Hitler is wrong. And the idea that by some kind of deterministic algorithm, you would cheer for Hitler no matter what your belief set would be is wrong. And certainly, for example, Jews in Germany didn't cheer for Hitler. And many other people didn't cheer for Hitler. Indeed, they left Germany in order not to cheer for Hitler. And some, a small minority granted, actually started a kind of underground opposition to Hitler. So Jordan Peterson likes to simplify it. And what Jordan Peterson is really trying to do in those statements where he says, you would have probably been a Nazi, is he's trying to emphasize an important idea in philosophy, and that is that we all have a dark side. Or if you want to put it in Christian terms, we all have original sin. We all are flawed. We're all potential Nazis. We're all potential Hitlers. It's why he loves Dostoevsky so much. Dostoevsky, again, in Crime and Punishment, portrays anybody could be a murderer. Anybody. So, an egoist perspective is to make everything about your own values. Now, that doesn't preclude loving your country when your country represents important values to you, like freedom, let's say. Then you love your country because it enables, it protects, in other words, your freedom. And therefore, it is an immense value to you. You might love your community in a small L kind of love. You might care about your community in a sense that your community, as a group, the individuals within it, generally are good people, benevolent, and together they have produced an environment that is pleasant and wonderful to live in, including some important values to you. I gave a few examples earlier. You might even like some of your neighbors. But again, the standard is your values, and you must discriminate. I don't love my fellow citizens. Some I do, some I don't. I don't love J.D. Vance, don't even like him. Actually think he's an enemy. I actually kind of hate him. Hate is good. It's a value evaluation. Hate says stay away from that person. It's a survival mechanism. It's needed. It's justice. To hate is to be just. I, for example, hate J.D. Vance. He's not good for me. He's not good for my values. He's destructive to me and my values. And he's destructive to the country, to the things about the country I value. Freedom, for example. So, do you hate Hamas? What do you think? Of course I hate Hamas. I hate all those who are anti-life, who are life destroyers. Now, so as an egoist, we actually do have a hierarchy of love. order of love. Right? Based on values, based on one's own values, based on what promotes a flourishing, successful, happy life. All right. I think what we're going to do is I'll start a new series, if you will, called Being an Egoist. And in the series, we'll take different issues like this and say, okay, well, how would an egoist approach this? How would an egoist deal with it, right? How would an egoist deal with this? And, you know, I was thinking of doing Being an Egoist, something more general, and then I saw this article. I thought this would be perfect. This is a perfect illustration of the difference between the world out there, including the intellectuals, the philosophers, and of course the religionists out there, and how they even approach the question of love, how they approach the question of help, how they approach the question of interacting with other people and your obligations or your relationship to other people. Your life is the standard. Your life is the standard for your values. You must choose your values based on their contribution to your life. Not based on God, not based on society, not based on some utilitarian arrangement, not based on some, I don't know, some other set of obligations, but based on your happiness, your life, your flourishing. And politically, that means since you must make those choices, government should have no business making those choices for you. Therefore, the idea that the government should take money away from you by force in order to give it to anybody, your neighbor, people on the other side of the planet, your fellow citizens, it's all wrong. All of it wrong. And in a sense, equally wrong. Welfare, a forced, coerced charity, all of that is out. Egoism requires a government that leaves you free to make the choices of who to support, how much to support them, when to support them, in what way to support them. It places the responsibility on you as an individual to make those decisions. And it does not impose on you a decision made in the name of what? In the name of God, in the name of, the social welfare or some utilitarian standard. And it doesn't matter if they're leftists or rightists. It doesn't matter if they're doing it in the name of whatever. They don't have the right to take from you to give to others. And this is not, has nothing to do with the economic argument. This has to do with the fact that your life is yours. You get to make those choices. So the answer to J.D. Vance is, I don't love any of those people, qua categories. And I don't want my money going to any of them. And to the extent I want my money going to anybody, I want to make the choice. How much, when, how, and to whom. Based on my own values. All right. We will call that, that's an hour. Perfect. We'll call that a show. Again, first show in a series I hope to do on what it means to be an egoist. We'll bring up different topics, particularly if they come up in kind of the culture, the news, what's going on out there. All right. You should ask questions, particularly if you like this format of a show, this kind of topic of a show versus the newsy shows. Show me that you like it, and one of the ways to show it is to like the show, give it a thumbs up. One way to show it is by asking a super chat question. In particular, I like the idea of asking a super chat question that relates to topic. So I would start with questions that relate to the topic, and then we can go to Ask Me Anything, which is fine. Andrew says, love you on riffing on these subjects. That's good. Hopefully more of you do, and please show the love in the questions. Value for value. All right, let's see. Let's just go to the super chat. I will mention that if you'd like to support the show on a regular basis, kind of on a monthly basis, please consider using Patreon. I've kind of got targets now for Patreon. It's growing. PayPal is bigger, and you can still use PayPal. PayPal's great, but I'd like to grow the support on Patreon. Patreon and PayPal take about the same amount, so it doesn't matter in that respect. Patreon is easier in other respects, just to handle, to deal with. And for you, it's easier in the sense that you can change them out very easily. I'd love to see you guys who are not yet supporting the show on a monthly basis go on Patreon and make a contribution. It's very easy to do. I know a lot of you have probably procrastinated about doing this and showing value for value. It's a great time to do it. And finally, my discussion over the last 2 days about Trump's agenda has caused a bunch of people to unsubscribe. I don't get it. What do they not like about what I have to say? Something, obviously. So let me just ask those of you who are listening right now who are not subscribers yet to please subscribe. We're only I think 11 away or 12 away from 39,000. I'd like to get there soon, today, tomorrow, this coming week. So please consider becoming a subscriber. Here you can, while you're listening, just press on the subscribe button. If you're listening on a podcast and you'd like to subscribe to the YouTube channel, it doesn't cost anything. Just go to YouTube and subscribe. It'll be great to get to 39,000. It really helps, the bigger the number is, with the YouTube algorithm. And then finally, yes, I want to remind you that there will be a members-only show tomorrow. If you're not a member yet, you can sign up right here and become a member. There's a membership button here. And, there'll be a members-only show tomorrow where I'll be having a conversation, I guess, with John Barban about health, how to take care of yourself, how to think about health. Health 3.0, as Peter Attia has defined it. What is that? How does that work? How should you think about health 3.0, which I think is really, really crucial. And then we'll also talk about John's perspective on diet and exercise. Again, I'm not an expert in these things. John has studied this quite a bit, but feel free to disagree. This is just, I'm just bringing you his perspective. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But I hope that you guys can join that conversation. To do so, you have to become a member. So if you'd like to gift memberships, you can gift memberships to some of the people watching the show today. I gifted 10 memberships yesterday. I'm out of gifting. So you guys need to do it. So if any of you want to come on board here and gift a membership, that'd be great. You can do 1, you can do 5, you can do 10, you can do 100. And that is a great way to get more people onto the members-only show tomorrow. All right. You can also, once you have a member, you can watch all the members-only shows that I've done in the past. All right, let's see. I am gonna start with questions related to the topic. Jennifer asks, so this JD view is basically blood and soil stuff. Yes, I mean, there's a certain logic to it, right? There's a certain appeal to it. We all care about that which is closer. But from his perspective, again, caring means sacrifice. And it makes, again, from a common sense perspective, for most Americans, I think it makes sense. So I'm willing to sacrifice for people close to me, not willing to sacrifice for people far away from me. And that's all fine, except for the issue of sacrifice. You shouldn't be willing to sacrifice to anybody. And then you have to really think about what values do the people represent who are close to you versus far away from you. And sometimes people far away from you might present a bigger value than people close to you. But that's a whole different thing. But yes, J.D. Vance is coming at this from a Christian nationalist perspective. And from a particular Catholic Christian nationalist perspective. I will actually do a show maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday, on Christian nationalism, because I think it's really crucial to understand what Trump is doing from the perspective of a post-constitutional order, which again has the perspective of Christian nationalism. So sadly, we will be talking a lot about blood and soil, Christian nationalism over the next 4 years, because that is the dominant intellectual perspective now within the Republican Party and within the Trump administration. You've got a vice president, a secretary of defense, a head of the budget office, and my guess is a number of others, particularly in the circle around Trump, who are explicitly Christian nationalists. We'll talk more about that. So yes, blood and soil. Andrew, Rand was very respectful of parent-child relationship. She said parents are of personal value to you unless they're monsters. They may not be intellectual allies, but don't throw away your parents' love because of that. I think that's right, but you know, how much you love them and how much of a value they represent to you is ultimately going to depend on how much, you know, in your childhood, on the extent to which they were supportive and extent to which you view them positively as contributing to your childhood. And that contributed life to you. That's a huge value. And in that sense, I think Ayn Rand says, well, to really undo this idea of they're a value to you because they gave you life, they have to be monsters. But how much you love them, how much of a value they are, is going to depend on how they are today, how good of a people are they, and how were they when you grew up. None of that has to do with intellectual ally or not, right? You know, my parents are not intellectual allies, but they basically raised me well. I have no complaints about my childhood, not really. And they're good, decent people. So yeah, I have respect for them. I love them. You know, I live 5,000 miles away, and there's a reason, right? Well, I mean, I didn't put them as the primary, right? As some people would say, yeah, I'm not moving away from family. They're not primary. Your life is what's primary. So yes, you want to be respectful to your parents. You want to really think through your relationship with them, but it has to be you have to structure it in a way that it's value adding. Don't let a sense of obligation cause you to get into a relationship that is value losing, that is destructive to your values, destructive to your own life, destructive to what you're trying to achieve in your own life. Colleen asks, is the desire and guilt, flip sides, to help people, my Catholic upbringing, or my valuing life? I don't know. You have to figure that out, right? If there's guilt associated with it, it's probably your Catholic upbringing. Because your valuing life would not cause you to feel guilty. Your valuing life would say, I didn't help that person because I had more important things to do with regard to my time or my money in the context of my life. And then you wouldn't feel guilt. The guilt, when you don't help somebody, is almost always a consequence of our altruistic upbringing. Of course, a Catholic upbringing is particularly altruistic because Catholics take their altruism more seriously, and Catholics are more intellectual, and therefore they bring these things to forward in educating their children. Now, your desire to help at least some people might be related to your love of life, but that you have to figure out. Is it really? And you have to figure it out in terms of who are the people you have a desire to help. You know, the bum on the street who is completely lost it and can add no value to you? Do you feel as much a desire to help him as, I don't know, your neighbor's kid just got cancer and they're struggling to pay the bills and you really like this neighbor? well, then it's Catholic. But if your desire to help your neighbor is dramatically greater than your desire to help some stranger or some homeless person, then it's probably your love of life. So you have to really think through, why do I want to help them? What does my love of life have to do with helping this person? Is help this person really a contributor, a reflection of my love of my life in any kind of significant way? And if the answer is no, then it's probably your upbringing. And in many cases, it's likely to be your upbringing because it's very hard. As much objectivism as you read, and you read and you study, it's very, very, very difficult to get rid of these premises. Very difficult to get rid of the premises associated with altruism. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of questioning when you feel the desire to help, maybe sacrifice, and when you feel the guilt. You have to really work it through. It takes years to get rid of it. Years and years and years. Thank you, Colleen. Andrew, Christian love combines monsters with angels. Yes, it does. Equates the criminal with the victim. Yep. And introduces force to your feelings. Yeah, that's what obligation, duty means. What happens to justice and freedom when you have to love? Well, it goes out the window. There cannot be justice when you conflate the criminal and the victim, when you conflate the monster and the angel, your enemy and your friend. There cannot be love when there can be true love, right? There cannot be true justice when you treat people the same. Justice demands discrimination. Justice demands, in a sense, a hierarchy of values. Justice demands figuring out who's of value and who's not of value, who's good for you and who's not good for you, who you love and who you don't, who you admire and who you don't. Love, values, justice requires a lot of thinking. Christianity, the Christian love doesn't require any thinking. And of course, freedom. If love imposes obligations on you and you don't live up to those obligations, then why be free? If the state or the church can force you, obligate you, can coerce you into fulfilling your obligations, they're doing you a favor. So why is freedom valuable if you must love everybody equally, treat everybody equally, and you can't? So justice and freedom are out the window. And indeed, the more altruism is prevalent in a culture, the more dominates a culture, the less free that culture will be. There's a direct correlation between the two. Altruism in its explicit form. Alexis says, great talk on love and values. Thank you, Alexis. I appreciate that. All right, let's take not your average algorithm. According to ITOE, ITOE is Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology by Ayn Rand. To be is to be something in particular, something finite that can be discriminated from other entities. This, not that. So there is no such thing as infinite. The universe cannot be infinite. Yes, that is the conclusion. That is the conclusion of this. The universe is not infinite; it is finite. Now, how to even think about that in the context of a universe, which is everything that is, and what's outside the universe? There can't be anything outside the universe. But what does it mean then that it's finite? Is tricky. But yes, the philosophical implication of things have to be something in particular is that the universe is not infinite, that indeed nothing is infinite. Now, it can be, in terms of time, it can have no start and no end. And it could be in terms of shape, you have no start and no end, but it still has to be finite. How do you resolve all that is beyond my pay grade. And we'll have to bring an expert into metaphysics in here. And, well, it means it's really, really, really big, but it also means that there's nothing, but it also means there's nothing outside of it. And it's hard for us, because of the way we think in 3 dimensions, to conceive of an object that is finite and yet there's nothing outside of it. But that, I think, is more of our limitation of our conventional thinking than it is anything else. Time, of course, is inside the universe, so there cannot be a beginning and ending of time. So the universe is timeless in that sense. So, yes. Thank you, not your average algorithm. Barry, does everyone have a dark side? Same psychologists or all say everyone does? Some psychologists say everyone does. No, I don't think everyone has a dark side. We're not split beings. I mean, I think Freud said that, and I think most psychologists say that, but it's just not true. Now, people who compartmentalize their evasions have a dark side that they have compartmentalized, that they have put away, that they evade. So, and a lot of people develop a dark side because for whatever reason during childhood they evade certain things and they develop a certain other that is evasive, irrational, and so on. But it is absolutely not the case that metaphysically, inherently, there's something about us that is dark. That again comes from Christianity, comes from original sin, and it comes from a false view of psychology. It really comes from, I think, if you think about it, I mean, I don't know where the origins are, but Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of the Persians, basically viewed the universe as this constant struggle, battle between the powers of evil and the powers of good. And they inhabit every one of us, and inside of us there's good and evil constantly fighting. Jordan Peterson views it as that. There's a Jekyll and Hyde, as Jennifer says, in every one of us. And it's a constant metaphysical, cosmological forces that are constantly fighting. And Christianity basically invents the devil. Well, she doesn't invent it. It takes it from Zoroastrianism. So Judaism doesn't have that, but Christianity brings this dualism into the world, where we all have, all struggling with these two parts of us, good and evil. So, but no, there's nothing in the nature of reality, there's nothing in the nature of man that suggests this. Michael says, will we have an objectivist culture in 50 to 100 years, or will Ayn Rand just be taken seriously in 50, 100 years? I don't know. I mean, I have no way of predicting what will happen in 50 years. It's very hard to make predictions like that. I've been involved in objectivism for 40, I mean, involved is wrong, but I've been involved personally in objectivism in terms of reading books and stuff like that since for 48 years. God, that's scary. 48 years, 47 years, let's say, 47 years. And a lot of progress has been made. And I believe that at some point, progress will be exponential. It'll go just like that. And in the meantime, we're still on what looks like a steady state, and then suddenly it goes like that. That's what exponential growth looks like. But to say when, I just don't know. I think in 100 years, we'll have an objectivist culture. I think in 50 years it'll be taken seriously. Taken seriously needs to be a stepping stone towards an objectivist culture. But there could be a nuclear war in the meantime. There could be a million other things that happen. I don't even know how to put the odds on something like that. And the point is that all we can control is what we do now in anticipation of that future. And I think we are doing everything that we can do, given resources, given the people, given the money, that we can do in order to get to that end result that we all want. Michael, were the Nazis unique in that they were well-organized evil? Most evil regimes are riddled with incompetence and chaos like Russia and Hamas. No, because the Nazis were not organized and competent. They were unbelievably incompetent. They made massive mistakes, even just from a military perspective. Their weapon systems were dramatically inferior to those of the United States. Their industrial capabilities was inferior to those of freer countries. So the Nazis were more competent than Hamas, but if they had survived another 20 years, they would have been just like the Soviet Union and just as incompetent and just as pathetic in terms of organizational skill. Evil is impotent. Now, Germany had the advantage, the Nazis had the advantage of rising in a relatively Western country, in a country that had embraced at least some elements of capitalism, had embraced elements of Western civilization culture, and therefore there were a lot of good, productive people there that the Nazis managed to capture and worked for the Nazis even if they were not Nazis. Russia didn't have that, didn't have a base. So it had more wealth, it had more production than other evil institutions. But once that generation had died out, they would have become just as incompetent as everybody else. So no, nothing unique about the Nazis, other than they happen to be in Germany, which was relatively Western. Michael says, easy wealth creation eliminates the need for most charitable activity. In a fully capitalist society, where it's relatively easy to become wealthy, people will be able to pay for any help they need. I think that's right. I think the solution to poverty is wealth creation. The solution to poverty is capitalism. The solution is to get rich. And when I think I ran this experiment with you guys once, if you take the minimum wage, if you take the kind of the standard for poverty in the United States today, whatever it is, 20,000 a year, 30,000 a year, whatever it is, and you grow that by 5% a year because of compounding, 5% real growth a year, which was what I think a capitalist society could grow at, then you suddenly get people earning six figures within a few decades. And at that point, nobody, and this is in real terms, right? Because we're talking about controlling for inflation. So we're talking about everybody being wealthy. Now, they won't be relatively wealthy. There'll always be some people who are relatively poor, but they'll be absolutely wealthy. They'll be absolutely beyond. And look, most poor people in America are wealthy in a sense that they drive cars, they have air conditioning, they have a refrigerator, they have electricity, they go on the internet, they have smartphones. So in absolute terms, many of the poor in America, maybe even most of the poor in America, are not poor. Not from the perspective of poor being on the verge of death, on the verge of not being able to survive. Now, maybe that's because you'd argue, some people would argue, you won't argue it, some people would argue, that's because of the welfare state. But my argument is that it's not the welfare state, it's the welfare state actually retards growth. They'd be a lot wealthier if that didn't exist. Wonder Freeman, do that for 40 years, 1.05 over 40. That's the number I want to see, 1.05 to the 40th power. Andrew, I don't love Marjorie Taylor Greene more than an illegal immigrant picking vegetables in a field. Oh, I love her a lot less. A lot less. I despise her. I don't despise the illegal immigrant picking strawberries in a field. I like the strawberries. like the vegetables. Yeah, so Anna Freeman did the calculation, right? So 5% growth over 40 years, right, is 700%. So if you make $30,000 a year and now grow that by 700%, you're making close to $200,000 a year, right? Well, no, you're making over $200,000 a year, which is perfect. You're not poor anymore. In 40 years, all poverty is eradicated. 210,000 is upper middle class. Everybody, the poorest people in America, are upper middle class. Seth B. How do you convey Ayn Rand's ideas to others who are new to it? Most are completely steeped in the ideas of contemporary culture, duty-bound attitude, altruism as the moral foundation. Through novels? I think the novels are the best way. But if you want a conversation and to intrigue them, ask them a lot of why questions. You know, why sacrifice? Why is your life not worth as much as the person's who you sacrifice to's life? Why not make more choices for yourself? Why is force okay in this context? Why are you willing to be coerced? How do you know what you know? And intrigue them. But ultimately, the best way to introduce people to Ayn Rand is through the novels, is to get them to read Atlas and the Fountainhead. But ask them, and one of the best ways is suggest to them that you have a different version, a different view, a different idea on how to live your life. And you're a happy, normal, well, better than normal, good person. And you could say, just to provoke them, no, I'm an egoist. I believe in self-interest. You should try it. You should read about it. Here's Atlas Shrugged. But yes, get them to read the novel somehow and intrigue them with your questions and your attitude. Don't piss them off. All right, let me thank some of our stickers. We had some good stickers. Well, we had some stickers. I think I saw Jonathan Honing, Martin Anderson. Thank you, Martin. I saw Jonathan. And Adri did $50. Thank you, Adri. Really, really appreciate that. Thanks, Adri. And let's see, do we have any other stickers? Oh, Gary. Gary did a sticker. And Armin just came in with $100. Thank you, Armin. I really, really love this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, Armin says, I was discussing the evils of tariffs with a friend, and he countered by mentioning China dumping of subsidized goods to undermine American industries and raising prices later. How should I respond? Well, I mean, China pays a huge cost for dumping in the United States. That cost is it has to find the money. It has to take money from other things in order to make up the losses of industries that are dumping in the United States. And during the period where the dumping happens, the United States is gaining enormously. Let's say they're dumping steel. Well, if they're dumping steel, that means it's costing them. They're losing money on the steel. It's costing them, and we're, benefiting enormously from that and investing that saving because we're buying cheaper steel to make cars that are then cheaper, and those industries are growing. And indeed, the reality is that all the jobs that we might lose in the steel industry because China's dumping them into the steel, all those are then, more jobs are created in the industries where we're saving money. And we see this constantly. The United States has become richer and richer and richer and richer. More and more and more and more jobs are being created. At the same time as we have basically lost the textile industry to China and then Vietnam and Bangladesh and India. We've lost some heavy manufacturing. We've lost steel. We've lost a bunch of things, and yet we get richer. Exactly because of that, because they're producing it cheaper, which makes it possible for us to go up the value chain, and make things that are more valuable, that contribute more, and create jobs around those things. Now, what prevents China from then, at the next step, raising prices way above what the market would bear, right? Because if they just raise the price to market prices, then it's fine. Nothing's happened. Now we're paying market prices, but we're not paying the cheap prices, but still market prices. So we're still going about our business. But what if they raise prices above market prices? This is the classic story about the monopolists. Well, as soon as they do that, they create incentives for others to undercut their pricing. China's not the only producers of steel, for example. The Japanese produce steel. They might struggle as the Chinese are dumping, but not all their steel companies will go out of business. And when China ramps up the price, they'll reintroduce capacity. Maybe even in the United States, we'll reintroduce some capacity in those industries that were being dumped on. And now we'll be underpricing the Chinese. And the reality is that monopolies or cartels or countries that try to do this by dumping land up losing big time. They lose when they dump, and they can never make it up because as soon as they price their product above market, other people enter the market and price them out and drive their prices down. So they can never make up their losses. And the reality is that this has been shown over and over and over again, in industry after industry. The Japanese arguably were dumping chips, microchips, memory chips, into the United States market. Intel used to be in the 1970s and then in the early 80s, Intel was the dominant player in the world in memory chips. And then the Japanese figured out how to make them cheaper than Intel. And I don't think they were dumping, but they just figured out how to make them cheaper than Intel, and they undercut Intel, and they sold them in the United States cheaper than Intel. And Intel almost went out of business. And what it did is it forced Intel to go up the value chain. So now that computers were getting really, really cheap memory chips, there was more demand for computers and more demand for computing power. And what Intel did is it pivoted away from memory chips in the mid-80s towards, what do you call it? I don't know how you call it, the chips that power the computer itself, right? And they became the dominant player in the world for chips that power the computers. And again, that still allowed the Japanese to continue selling memory chips. They never raised prices. Memory chips are a lot cheaper today than they were back then. And quality kept going up because the Japanese knew if they raised prices a lot, somebody would compete against them. CPUs, thank you, Wanda Freeman and Christopher. CPUs. And Intel makes CPUs. Now, Intel now is struggling with CPUs because now there's a new chip, the kind of chips that, a couple of new chips, but the kind of chips that Apple makes, which are not traditional CPUs, the same as Intel. They are, I forget what they're called, but somebody will tell me. And then there's NVIDIA chips, which are very different than Intel. And now suddenly Intel's discovering that they don't dominate the CPU. That's competition. That's dynamism. Now, it's true that China can afford, in a sense, to subsidize its industries, to dump. Can't do it forever, and it will never make up the losses. And we should accept the fact that they dumped and accept the fact that they dumped the chips, dumped whatever they're dumping, and use that fact, buy cheaper materials in order to make other stuff. William says AMD is a competitor to Intel. That's right, but ultimately it's TSMC, which is a foundry. TSMC changed the business model of chip manufacturing from having a foundry and design as separating this two out. Intel did everything, both design and manufacturing. TSMC only manufactures, and Apple, for example, only designs. But there's a different architecture to Apple chips than the traditional CPU. Anyway, but it doesn't matter. I think you got the point. Armin says, thank you very much. Another $100. Thank you, Armin. Really, really, really appreciate the support. And I think we'll call it a show. We've got one other question from Hector. Moving to Hawaii, Yaron. Took your advice. I value great weather, etc. Going to try and make it happen while still young. Leaving life away from Iowa. Wow, Iowa to Hawaii. That is a big change. Now, Hawaii has high taxes, but it has amazing weather and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful beaches. And it's got a very laid-back lifestyle, I think. Very laid back. So, but yeah, that's exciting. If that's your values, then that's your values. That is terrific, and that's good for you. Good for you. And I'm glad I inspired you to make the choice. Hopefully it works out. Oh, and a great fruit. Great tropical fruits. That's right. All right, everybody, have a fantastic rest of your weekend. And I'll catch you tomorrow on the Members Only show. Don't forget, Members Only. Sign up, become a member, and you can join us tomorrow. And if not, I'll see you on Monday. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend. And thank you, all the Super Chatters, in particular, Armin, for coming in there at the end with $200. Really, really, really appreciate it.